This episode of Ask the Doctors is being brought to you by the City of Richmond and Wayne County Government.
From the Richmond Code Enforcement Department.
On behalf of the Richmond Police Department.
On behalf of the Richmond Street Department.
From everyone at Roseview Transit.
From the Finance Department.
From the Office of Human Resources.
From the Richmond Sanitary District.
From the Parks and Recreation Department.
From the Law Department.
And the Information Technology Department.
From the Department of Infrastructure and Development, City Planning, and the Richmond Municipal Airport.
On behalf of everyone from the Richmond Fire Department.
From all of us here at the City of Richmond to you and your family, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a happy and safe New Year. Stay strong, Richmond.
Your friends in Wayne County government hope you have a happy and safe holiday. They hope you will keep your gatherings to immediate household members. But whatever you choose to do, please follow all local public health guidelines, including proper hand washing, social distancing, and minimally wear your mask.
You realize that quarantining is for your community. You want to stay home to keep everyone who could have severe symptoms of COVID-19 safe.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We are not streaming on Facebook Live today because we're dedicated, but we're not stupid. It is Christmas Day, it is New Year's Day. We are not here live. We're actually recording this just for some context on the 21st of the month, which is the Monday after we did the last show. So there are some things that we might normally do, which we won't do, but we do have the doctors here, so that's going to be normal. Dr. Thomas Huth, Vice President of Medical Affairs at Reed Health.
How are you, Eric?
I'm well. How are you?
Perfect.
Good. Dr. David Jetmore, Wayne County Health Officer. Sir?
Glad to be here, Eric, on this wonderful Monday afternoon.
I thought you'd come in with that just a little bit heavier. I thought you'd be doing the Santa thing.
I do have kind of a semi-Santa gig this afternoon, but this is the best I could do.
That's it?
I mean, you strain and strain, but it only grows at a certain rate.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here again on Ask the Doctors. Let's start with some information, if we could. Dr. Jetmore, one of the things we asked is, are there any special hours for Covet testing during this holiday season? And you said you'd check that out for us.
Yes, I did. Both of our testing sites will be closed on Christmas Day, but on Christmas Day Eve, both sites will be open from 8 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay. And that's it. So open New Year's Eve and...
Yes, and I doubly checked with Christine, who's my peripheral brain down at the health department. She said they'll be open on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day.
Okay. One of the questions that I had a chance to pick, and we actually did when we left the show on Friday, we said if you have any questions, send us. We actually did get some questions, so we'll have some questions for you. But one of the questions, and I think one of the first ones that Ryan was going to bring up, was somebody asked how the two of you all were doing post vaccination. We know that there's this 15-minute waiting period that you're asked to do. You've now had a weekend. You were both saying on Friday that you were feeling pretty good after getting your test on Thursday. Mm-hmm. Did the weekend change anything? Do you have any more soreness in your arm? Do you feel anything different in that way? Did you have any fever over the weekends?
Well, so we are not quite, as we tape this, we're not quite 4 days I think, after having the shot. And, I would say that the day after the shot, which was Friday, if I thought about it, I could say, yeah, my arm's a little bit sore, but it really wasn't something that bothered me continuously. Never had a bit of fever, never had a bit of headache or muscle aches or feeling poorly at all. And, that hasn't changed. So I have personally sailed through this without really any symptoms to speak of. What about you, Dr. Jetmore?
Yeah, my experience mirrors yours, Tom. I noticed today that all the soreness in my shoulder was gone. So the soreness probably Friday, Saturday, probably lasted 3 days. And diminished over those 3 days. But you often see that with any vaccination, so that's not an unusual symptom. But I didn't have any tiredness or fever or any problem whatsoever.
Okay. Talk a little bit about how last weekend into this weekend went. Numbers seemed to be declining in the county at the time. And again, this show is going to last for a couple of weeks, so this is where we are at the beginning of the week that starts on the 21st of December.
I've not had a chance to look at the Wayne County numbers since then, so I don't know what they are. Dr. Jetmore can comment, but the read numbers have continued to decrease. They're not they're not zero, they're not normal. We still have quite a bit of COVID-19 in the building, but the numbers, all the numbers of patients in isolation, the numbers of patients with definite positive lab tests, and crucially those on ventilators have declined. I think we're down to about 3 this morning, where we had 8 when we last spoke. So that's improved quite a bit.
Well, as far as the county goes, up to this point, we've had 4,800 cases or thereabouts and 128 deaths. Our positivity rate's running at 11.3%. We're testing about 200 people a day, which is down a little bit. And our positivity rate is probably a little bit below the states. I think they're at 12.5 as of last Wednesday. I would like to say we ordered a mobile clinic. This was through the foresight of the commissioners and the mayor, and that we'll take delivery of that mobile clinic on January the 11th, which is incredibly timely. We'll be able to go out and, as these vaccines come online, be able to vaccinate people in different parts of the county. So that's pretty exciting. One of the things I did not have the answer to last week, someone asked me about the number of opioid deaths. And there have been in 2020 so far 40 opioid overdose deaths, with 13 cases that are still pending, meaning they may well have been an opioid death, but that hasn't been officially made. This would be due to toxicology results or the decision by a coroner. And that compares to 90 cases back in 2019. So actually our overdose rate has declined during the pandemic, which has really been the opposite of what people have found in other parts of the country. One of the things I found that if you look back at the deaths in Wayne County, we average about 1,000 people a year dying. And last year there were 1,021 people who died. This year, and that's from any cause, heart attack, COVID, this year there were 1,202. In other words, about 180 cases more than you would expect. And the reason I mention this is, remember us talking back in the spring when people were saying, well, I think they're just saying they died of COVID. They could have died from something else, and COVID's getting the credit.
Right.
But you can't argue with the fact that we're having 180 more deaths than we would normally see over the passage of the year. We know 128 of them are from COVID. So it's likely from this instance that we're probably undercounting the number of COVID deaths. It's probably more than the 128 I mentioned earlier.
We've got a couple of questions. I mentioned that. We're going to get to a couple of things. I know one of the things that we want to try to talk to is it didn't happen till Saturday, I believe, the emergency use authorization for the Moderna vaccine. We do want to kind of get to that, get to your wording. I think that may be useful for you all when you roll out your mobile van, because I don't think you all have one of those ultra cold refrigerators built into that.
No, we won't have to make a run on the dry ice store, Eric, to keep our vaccine 70 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit.
But let's try to knock out a couple of the questions early here, and then I know that you also provided us with a little information that we're going to go through. So I've heard that there have been a few cases of Bell's palsy after someone has had the COVID vaccine. If someone has had Bell's palsy in the past, do you believe that they have a higher chance of getting it again?
The Bell's palsy thing, I think, is something that's cropped up with the data that's coming from the Moderna vaccine particularly. And just to review what that is it's the temporary, usually temporary paralysis of one of the big cranial nerves, the seventh nerve that runs a lot of the musculature on the face. And people who have that will have a droopy side of the face. And we don't really know exactly what causes it, whether it's suspected, aside from this thing about the potential of association with a vaccine, we don't really know what causes it. There's suspicion that maybe it's somehow an immunologic reaction to a virus infection, or there are a lot of theories about it, but we don't know for sure. And ordinarily it's temporary, may resolve within days to months, but once in a while it becomes permanent, which is very unfortunate and difficult for people who are afflicted with it. And but it's pretty uncommon. I mean, I've certainly seen it a number of times in my years of practice. Not a dramatic number. You may have had more opportunity to doing ENT work, possibly.
But our office saw probably every patient that ended up with Bell's palsy. It's interesting, Tom, is that there are many things that can paralyze the face. You can have an injury to the nerve from trauma, a fracture of the bone where the nerve is going through a little bony tunnel. Interestingly enough, if you can't explain the cause, whatever left we call Bell's palsy. If you've got a paralyzed face and you can't figure out why that is, that's Bell's palsy. It's almost everyone recovers from this. You have to make sure you can't blink your eye because of the paralysis, so we typically tape the patient's upper eyelid down so that there's no damage to the eye. But in my experience, I've never seen anybody that has ever had complete paralysis and it was kept that way. I think in a worst case scenario, you may end up with some residual weakness of your face. But the vast majority of people, I would say 95% plus, get full recovery. The other thing with Bell's palsy is it's very difficult to ascribe that to being vaccinated. It occurs all the time in our population. I'm not sure what the occurrence rate is per 100,000 people, but just because you had COVID had that COVID vaccine and got Bell's palsy, it doesn't mean those two instances are related. If I knew of someone that had COVID or had Bell's palsy and was asking whether or not they should get the vaccine, I would encourage them to go ahead and get the vaccine anyway, because I think the risk of the Bell's palsy is much less than the risk of contracting COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's there. For full disclosure, that it came up in the data, particularly with the Moderna vaccine, and they're reporting it. It's a small number of cases. The association, though, is difficult to understand. And whether or not it's truly related is unclear at this point. I'm sure it's one of the things that with more research, the FDA will be interested in Moderna, exploring further, looking further into the data. We can't really explain why that is. There's not a warning against getting the vaccine in the EUA because of a previous history of it. So, I think I'm with Dr. Jetmore. Is probably somebody who gets Bell's palsy may have immune system dysfunction anyway, and possibly is more at risk from COVID-19. Because, a lot of times people who get Bell's palsy, it can happen to anybody, but, I sort of feel like it's maybe a little bit more common in people who have other underlying medical conditions. And so we would think that that kind of person would be more at risk from COVID-19. And I would say consider getting the vaccine anyway. But as always, talk to the doctor about it and before you make a final decision about whether to move ahead.
Let's bring up a couple more questions before we venture off. If we're donating blood, is that the same as the plasma donation?
Good question, and the answer is no. There are several different products that can be generated from donation, and you can donate whole blood on the one hand, or you can donate plasma on the other. There are different processes, so if we're intending to donate plasma, we have to go through the plasma process, which is very different, takes a lot more time, and but you could do it more frequently. And speaking of plasma donation, nobody's said anything that I've seen or heard, but I just wonder with lots of people starting to get vaccinated now, and of course we're all theoretically at least going to have lots of COVID antibodies coming from this. Would we become plasma donors, potential plasma donors? I haven't heard anybody say, but I'll probably be looking into that. And so I think as more people get vaccinated, that might be a possibility that we'll have more opportunity for plasma donors for convalescent plasma.
Anything to add?
Well, I agree. Actually, Tom, when I was thinking about that, you probably have the maximum number of antibodies.
Right.
You're probably an ideal antibody donor if you've been vaccinated.
I would think. I think as it stands today, somebody can simply, who's not had a verified COVID-19 illness, can get antibody levels checked, and if they're positive, the blood center will take your plasma for convalescent plasma donation.
Question was about blood donation, and just want to mention, even though this is a recorded program, this will air before this happens. So there is actually a blood drive scheduled for Tuesday the 29th from 7:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. First Friends meeting. Schedule at donortime.com. So definitely do that. We were talking at one point, once the pandemic started, that the blood supply was low. We weren't getting donors, but people also weren't going to their doctors. How has the blood supply, has you all supply of blood come back to the type of levels that you need on a daily basis?
I think there have been a couple of factors in there, but I just heard this morning that our on-hand blood supply is about 90% of normal, which is as close as we've been for several months. So things have improved, but we do definitely still need blood donation.
Okay. So December 29th, deal with that. Let's get to one more question before we kind of break off into this conversation a little bit more. Should we be concerned about the new strain of COVID-19 that is present in the UK?
Well, I think potentially, yes. I mean, we don't know very much about it yet. What its implications are. They're saying in the news media that maybe it's actually more transmissible, but not necessarily more severe in terms of the effects that someone gets if they get infected with it. And I guess another question that people will have is, these vaccines that we're getting now, are they going to be protective against it? All great questions that we don't have any answers to at this point, but we'll be watching really closely.
Well, I have to echo that. I think the jury's out on what this means. I think obviously we need to be concerned because it's become, the one thing that is obvious is this is much more easily transmitted, this new mutation, than the other one. But I'm comforted by the fact that there doesn't seem to be the people don't seem to be any sicker or doing worse than with the other strains. The antibody we're getting is an antibody getting from the vaccine is an antibody against that spike protein, and I would think it would be just as protective as with this new strain as it is with the other strains. But again, the jury's out. As time passes, we'll find out more about this.
You're watching Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're spending some time with Dr. David Jetmore, Wayne County Health Officer, Dr. Thomas Huth, Vice President of Medical Affairs at Reed Health. Let's get into just a little bit of the Moderna vaccine. We always turn to you gentlemen for the information. We know that it doesn't have to be kept as cold, and we know that the time frame from first to second shot is a week different between the two, I believe.
Yeah.
What else is the difference between those two vaccines that people should know about or care about?
I think in most important, the very most important ways, they're really, really similar. They have very similar effectiveness rates and very similar side effect profiles. In terms of the things that we discussed earlier, the headache and fever and that kind of thing. The Moderna vaccine may have more of the minor side effects after the first shot than the Pfizer one does, but the Pfizer may have more after the second shot than Moderna does. In some data that Dr. Weaver was sharing a couple weeks ago, it seemed that way. One big significant difference that stands out is that the Moderna vaccine is only approved for use down to age 18. The Pfizer vaccine can be given down to 16. It's interesting that in the Moderna vaccine, they didn't take any subjects under the age of 18, so there were no people younger than that. In the Pfizer vaccine studies, they did take people down to age 12, but they just had so few under age 16 that the FDA didn't feel comfortable approving it down to age 12. I mean, there were literally about 24 people between the age of 12 and 16 in the Pfizer studies. So that was only approved down to 16. So there is that difference, depending on where you're going and what vaccine they've got, you may be able to get a 16 or 17-year-old vaccinated, or you may not.
Yeah.
Just depending on
Moderna
which
is
one.
now doing studies on younger kids, and so they'll be behind, but probably I can't project a timetable, but they will come out with a vaccine for younger age groups.
Yeah, I'm sure. Other than that, of course, the storage and handling requirements are significantly different. That my assumption is that those organizations who have the ultra-low temperature storage capability may get more of the Pfizer vaccine, and they'll, at least until supplies are much more plentiful, track the Moderna vaccine to vaccination centers that don't have that capability, because they'll be more easily able to handle that. Theoretically, you can do things with the Pfizer vaccine to use them in scenarios where you don't have the freezer. You can maintain the thermal shipper can supposedly be maintained, but I think what they found in practice that's extremely difficult to do, much more difficult than was expected, so they're not recommending people do that anymore, which says to me that probably Moderna's going to, say, the health departments where you're going to have you're going to have your mobile unit, which will not have an ultra-low temperature freezer in it, but you can easily manage a Moderna vaccine possibly. You'll probably get more of that, or maybe only that, and not Pfizer at all, and maybe organizations like mine where I've got a huge ultra-low temperature freezer, we may continue to get Pfizer preferentially.
Can you all explain to us, because there has been this news out there that you all were told you were going to get 2,000 doses beginning next week, and then you were told you were only going to get 900.
Right.
So, and I'm not saying that those numbers are real, but across multiple states, states were told to that they were going to get lower numbers than they were originally told.
Right.
Talk to us about how and where those decisions are made, how you all get that information, and how the state knows you do or don't have an ultra-low freezer to send you, don't send us Pfizer, we can't keep it, only send us Moderna. How are those decisions made, handled, and can you say, okay, we're out, send us more? What's the distribution work for this?
As far as the changes to the numbers that, that all comes from the federal government, like you're right. We were initially told one tray, 975 doses. Now actually we think we can get about 1,100 doses out of a tray, but that's a different conversation. Then we were told, no, it's going to be 3 times that. And we're all, yay, that'd be awesome. And then it was, no, it's only going to be the 1 tray. But we think we're going to get 80,000 more doses, and why don't you expand your schedule and we'll send you some more vaccine. Then it was, well, those 80,000 doses didn't materialize. And this is like the day before we went live.
Right.
So, and this is not the state's fault. It's not anybody's fault at all. It's, it's what you get when you're trying to, on a national level, coordinate between the manufacturers and the shipping system. It's a hugely complex undertaking, and I don't know for sure, but I think what happened is they a week or so before all the sites went live, the federal government had what they called an end-to-end simulation, where they did some test shipments. And to certain sites, there was one place in Indiana that participated in that, and just to kind of see what happens and learn from it. I think what they realize is they're competing for the shipping capacity with Amazon and Target.com and so forth, and there just are limits to what the shipping system can handle. And then also there was an issue with one of the manufacturing sites for Pfizer, where they were going to have less ready on the schedule that they thought. So a number of factors kind of came in at the last second. Basically, we're just kind of staying day to day. We do not expect to have any new vaccine this week. They've already told us that. Next week's shipment may be larger than we were expecting, but you know what? Based on past experience, we're not going to count on that. And it's not the state's fault. But there is a system for reordering when we're low and ready for more that will come into play after the first few weeks. Right now, they're just shipping us what they can when they get it. And, so basically everybody's being very, accommodating and forgiving for things, kind of seeming like they're, I don't want to say disorganized, but all these last-minute changes and so forth. That's what we expect for trying to deal with an emergency, and on a very expedited basis. You have to make adjustments at the last minute.
This is such a massive undertaking and something that's never been done before. It's without precedent that you would expect bumps in the road here and there. So none of this is alarming, and I think as we go forward, it'll get smoother.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still anticipating the rollout to take months, based on what you're hearing. We've got 2 vaccines. I think Johnson & Johnson may be coming sometime after the first of the year, which means there'll be 3 out there. You're trying to vaccinate some 300 million people or something along those lines. The average and they're saying essential workers, teachers, I think, are part of that next second group, and that may be part of what the health department is helping to do as you reach that second group beyond doctors, nurses, the medical professionals that's in this first group. Do you get to say, we need more of the Pfizer vaccine as opposed to the Moderna vaccine when you do your reordering?
Right now we're taking what we get. And if they send us a big shipment of Moderna, we'll use that. If they don't send us another Moderna for a long time, then it is what it is.
But people's second doses have to be what the first dose
well, that
was,
much
correct?
They have said. They promised that there will be, because these 1,000 or so, 1,100 doses that we have currently, and as of today, by the end of today, we'll have given about as much as half of that. I mean, it probably won't be quite half, but it'll be over 300. And so about a third maybe in the 2.5 days of vaccine clinic that we've done. But we are told use up what you've got on first doses. So we're not saving any for the second doses. They're promising us we will have replacement vaccine for the second doses. So that much we sort of have to have. There won't be much tolerance for missing that because people have to get those shots within a very short window around that 21st day.
You're watching Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We are a recorded program, recording this on Monday, December 21st. We did get some questions in over the weekend. We want to try to get a couple more of those in before we move on. So if we've got another question up, is the antibody test offered at Kroger worth it? Is it good to have one done?
I didn't know you could get an antibody test at Kroger.
It's news to me too. I think this is basically, it's not been helpful to us, and when we're dealing with COVID, I mean, for somebody to find out if the antibody test doesn't tell you you're infected, it tells you have been infected. It predicts a past event.
It predicts a past event.
That's right. As ironic as that sounds. I think this is the most I hear antibody tests talked about is people saying, and I was one of those people, I was deathly ill in December. I mean, I was sicker than a dog. I wonder if that was COVID. So a lot of people might want to get an antibody test to see if that event was COVID, but you still don't know. You may have had a symptomless infection between last December, now over the past year. What are your thoughts, Tom, on getting an antibody test?
If you're curious to know, I mean, you said the Wayne County cases are up to, there's got to be around 5,000 now, right?
Yeah, they're right at 4,800.
Okay. So 4,800 people are known to have been infected, but we think that we undercount that because of the amount of asymptomatic infection, right? Or low symptom infection that people never get tested for. And so there could be, let's just use a factor, use whatever factor you want. Some people think that we underestimate by a factor of 10. So that means there could be 48,000 people who've had the infection so far in Wayne County, which would be half and or more. And the question would be, well, if I could have been one of those, what's the usefulness to me to knowing that I have antibodies now? Number one is just if you're curious, I wouldn't count on that, meaning that you could not get infected again or couldn't pass it on because we have questions out there, the unresolved questions about that. But if you want to know whether you're qualified to donate blood for convalescent plasma, that would be a reason to do an antibody test. But it isn't going to tell you very much about, how long ago I had the infection, because it could have been several months. And I don't know what they're doing at Kroger. I hadn't heard antibody tests. And a lot of places are doing the rapid antigen test. And I wonder if maybe that's actually what that is. In which case, that does tell you if you currently have infection now, and is maybe more useful to answer other questions like, do I need to quarantine or do I need to isolate, and that kind of thing. So. Yeah, it depends on exactly what test is being offered, but if it is an antibody test, that's normally done through a blood stick, and it kind of has limited usefulness, so we don't typically recommend it.
Okay. I think we've got another couple of questions, so let's go to the next one. How will travel back and forth between Ohio be affected if Wayne County goes red?
Well, that we're orange right now, which is our infectivity rate is less than 15, but the number of cases we're seeing daily is per 100,000, I think, is 785. So we're close to red, but that designation of red means it doesn't really affect travel. What it does affect within the county is that right now the governor's mandated in level orange that not more than 50 people can gather, and this would lower that number down to 25. And then it sets guidelines of maybe taking a closer look at things going on in schools, but a lot of this is left, is not focally defined as the number of people gathering being brought from 50 down to 25. But it doesn't affect travel between Wayne County and other Ohio or other counties for that matter.
I don't think Ohio, I think that was the context drawn from Indiana to Ohio. I know Ohio has restrictions that are a little bit different than what Indiana has, but so
their color coding is different too, which is you gotta get some uniform color coding when you're bordering on a state.
Some states have required quarantines for people going into the state if they're going to stay at all, but typically those have kind of exempted, just crossing the border for work. You live near the border, cross the border to near the edge for work. So there have always been exemptions to that. I don't think Ohio has that situation now. So probably there is not any significant impact to going into Ohio. It's not like they're going to post, I wouldn't think they're going to post like highway patrol guys at the border and stop every car and check your credentials or your
there may be other
papers
states that would
and make you turn around if you're from Wayne
quarantine.
County. But
for a while there was a quarantine if you went to Illinois from Indiana. You had to quarantine for a couple weeks, and there in Indiana
Florida has had that, and sometimes they've picked specific states.
Yeah.
If you were coming from New York, going into Florida, you had to do it.
If you had a state with a very high level of infection, then in order to protect your own citizenry, you would make those people quarantine when they entered. A lot of that's gone away, but some may still exist. I can't keep up with all 50 states.
I was going to say, with what we know, and there were a lot of things that happened in March, April, May, that may not need to happen now. With all we know, would it be necessary for a state, in your opinion, to put a quarantine in if people were traveling? Do we know enough about the virus now that some of those things maybe don't need to happen?
I think when you limit the movement of people, you limit infection. So these are all things that work. The question is, I think really we've gotten to the point in the United States where the virus has so overrun all of us that at this point it's like, closing the barn door after the horses escaped. I think the earlier we were in the pandemic, the more it would have helped. But I don't think it would be of much use now. What are your thoughts,
Yeah, I guess that's
Tom?
true. When you think about it that way, in the very earliest days, there were severe hotspots like in New York, New Jersey, Illinois, and the Pacific Northwest, Washington State, around Seattle, but not much anywhere else. And then it probably would make more sense to have quarantines. Oh, you're coming from New York, which Florida did at that time, before Florida had very much. If you were going from New York to Florida, and there were a lot of people fleeing New York to try to get away from COVID, but they'd land, wherever they landed, they'd get a knock on the door to say, by the way, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. I don't think that much happens now, because if you look at the map of the U.S., every state's got some amount of COVID going on, and the rates of new cases have really changed a lot over the last month. I'm doing an exhibit for the Read board today that kind of illustrates that. A month ago, the highest activity was in the upper Midwest, and the upper plain states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Iowa. You could just see that the heat map was really the focus at that time. But if you look at it today, it's actually the bigger states that now have the highest new case rates: California, Texas, Florida, the states that have the highest population.
Tennessee sticks out, though.
Tennessee is in there.
Tennessee, for whatever reason.
Tennessee is in there, and Rhode Island has had high rates, but it's changed dramatically. Bottom line is, I'm not sure there's any place you could go to escape COVID, particularly, and I'm not sure why Florida would make you, quarantine now, because they're one of the high rate states already. That's the horse has gone from the barn kind of aspect of it. So, we've gotten a little bit far afield from the question. I'm not sure that things change with respect to Ohio, because really Ohio and Indiana kind of levitate a little bit together in terms of the rates of spread, maybe a little bit of differences over time, but Ohio has a lot of issues itself right now.
You're watching Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11, a pre-recorded show that will take us through this holiday season. We'll be back with a new live show first Friday of the new year. You always kind of bring us something. Normally it's the numbers that are going on. You did a little research on a piece with COVID-19 being now, and I've heard this on the news also, the leading cause of death in the U.S.
I guess it kind of is. I mean, so what I brought was just some data from a JAMA article. This is actually an editorial that came out around Thursday or Friday, and that was about the time that there were news stories about the leading cause of death. On this bit that's showing right now, you can see this pull quote: with COVID-19 mortality exceeding certain thresholds that they discuss in the article, this infectious disease has become deadlier than heart disease and cancer. And I think that really kind of is the headline. And I concocted my own graphic from some of the data that's in here. This wasn't exactly in there, but the top bar is the current daily U.S. COVID death rate. So about 2,600 deaths per day in the last week or so. That's the current rate as of today. That's almost as many deaths, it's not quite up to, but nearly the same amount of deaths as if we had a 9/11 every day. It's more deaths than if 15 Airbus 320 airplanes crashed every day. 15, not just one Airbus, but 15 of them would still not equal the amount of people who die from COVID-19 every day. And then, of course, you could see the common medical conditions: heart disease, cancer, drug overdose, lung disease was in there, motor vehicle accidents and murders. You had somebody asked a question earlier about the number of drug overdoses in Wayne County, and you can see that in the whole country there are only about 120 people who die from drug overdoses every day on average. So that's something like 20 times less than the daily COVID-19 death rate. So this is just maybe gives a little perspective. Numbers can just become numbers. And we see numbers go up, we see numbers go down, and they fail to elicit much emotional reaction from us at a certain point. And so comparing that to other meaningful things that all of us have experience with. We know people who die of heart attack, we know people who die of cancer, we know people who and we know about these traumatic things like airplane crashes and 9/11 that everybody still has really sort of in the forefront of memory even now. And the COVID-19 really kind of outdoes all of that by a large amount. So I don't know what to do different on account of it, unless maybe just help other people kind of get their minds right that, you know, we have to do more personally with the vaccine. We think will help, but it's going to take a really long time, and we have to continue taking personal responsibility for our own actions to avoid transmitting to other people. What I like to say is, you know, COVID-19 is something that's transmitted from person to person, from less vulnerable people to more vulnerable people. And the way to, you know, so we have to protect the vulnerable people by protecting ourselves.
Dr. Thomas Huth, Vice President, Medical Affairs, Reed Health. Dr. David Jetmore, Wayne County Health Officer. This is Ask the Doctors on WGTV Channel 11. I think we have one or two more questions in the queue. So let's see if we can get those in. We've got about 11 minutes left to go. With COVID numbers on the rise, should I stock up on medications that I take? If so, how many months' supply should I keep on hand?
I wouldn't recommend doing that. You know, it might take a lot of money, and you might run the risk of your medicines expiring before you ever use them. I don't think, you know, we're going to get to the point anytime soon that things are so overwhelming that you can't get to drugstores or to doctors and like that. That really isn't going to happen. Reed's numbers are coming down, which is good. Hope to see the Wayne County numbers come down. You know, I don't know what the next wave looks like, though. So, I mean, I think that's the caveat. When you look at Reed's numbers, you can kind of clearly see three different waves. We had the early spring wave. We had a smaller wave that hit us, that was, I say hit us, but that we saw in the summer. It wasn't overwhelming. We dealt with that very easily. Then we have this current wave that we're coming out of. That's been very traumatic wave. And that puts me in mind of the 1918 Spanish influenza epidemic that actually went on for several years with successive waves, some of them higher than previous ones. And that's how we got to 50 million deaths worldwide. And, you know, if we just simply let it take its course, I worry that that's what we're going to see, successive higher waves, that things could overwhelm the health system. But to the questioner's specific question, I do not think that this is the time to worry about that. We're far, far away from things being Armageddon-like.
Yeah, I wouldn't stock up on medicine. The drugstores will stay open. Your medicines are continue to be manufactured. You'll be able to get your medicines. But there is always that feeling in us as people when something's coming, we feel like we need to stock up. Which is why you can't find toilet tissue when there's a...
I noticed there's a lot of toilet paper in the grocery store last weekend, so I think people have calmed down. I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
Let's get to the next question. I was recently in close contact with someone who is sick, but we were wearing masks and following other precautions. It's probably just a cold, but they are awaiting their COVID test results. Should I self-quarantine, or is it okay for me to be around other people?
I think it would be prudent if that person did self-quarantine, just if only to wait for those test results.
Yeah, I think that in the general public, even if both parties are wearing masks, you still consider that a close contact, right?
Yeah, so, if they're less than 6 feet apart.
If that person ultimately does test positive, the original person, then even mask wearing, their contacts will be expected to quarantine. So your point is, I guess, you know, it won't take that long for that test to come back. On the chance it's positive, you might as well quarantine now and not expose anybody else that you don't have to.
Exactly. Think about what could happen over that 2 or 3 days while you're waiting for your test. You may expose your grandmother, your friends, and it's worth it for the safety of others to go ahead and take that precaution.
Were the numbers after Thanksgiving higher, lower, about what you expected? Did we have a post-Thanksgiving wave?
I don't think we had that burst of cases that I feared. I mean, we were thinking 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, which would have been, Thanksgiving was on the 26th, so about the 10th of December that we would have this big surge. I think there was a steady rise. It kept going. What do you think, Tom? You're always constructing graphs.
I think, I think it's difficult to read into the data that Thanksgiving had a significant impact, either in the Wayne County data or in Reed's data. Now, we were on a steep incline in that period, and we peaked around that time where we would think that Thanksgiving should make it a lot worse, but instead things have been coming down from there. So in my mind, it's difficult to construct a Thanksgiving bump scenario.
Okay. As we get more and more people vaccinated, there'll be less of this to worry about, but between now and then, what do you tell people?
We've got to keep on keeping ourselves and others safe. We've got to keep wearing masks, social distancing, and not letting our guard down. You know, I feel jubilant about being vaccinated and that we're getting vaccines. We're vaccinating people every day over at Reed Hospital, but it's such a small number. You got to remember, in order for us to have the life back that we had before all this started, we've got to vaccinate, most epidemiologists feel, 70% of the population. So we're talking almost 300 million people. So that's a monumental task. But we're started. I feel hopeful, but let's not, I always like to say, you know, you can hear the hoofbeats of the cavalry coming to save us, but that doesn't mean we put our guns down and quit defending ourselves. We've got to continue to take care of ourselves until all these vaccinations can be complete. And that will happen. I think it'll happen. No one knows for sure, but I think it'll accelerate. More vaccines will come online. More people will get vaccinated. I think by late spring or early summer, we'll get to that point.
Yeah, I think the cavalry analogy, you know, some of the scouts have ridden in, you know, we've got a few doses of a vaccine out there, but, but that doesn't, to your point, that doesn't mean we lay down our arms. You know, we still have to fight hard. The rest of the cavalry is going to trickle in over the next 6 months or more, and the last estimate I saw was maybe there'd be 100 million doses by about the end of the first quarter, so around April the 1st. And that's not enough to get to the 70%, magical 70% number we're looking for. That will probably happen in the summer. But then we can have all the vaccine in the world, but if people don't take it, then it doesn't do any good. So we have a lot of work to do to get people to adopt it. And but we should have other vaccines than just these two. You know, Moderna was authorized over the weekend. AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are on the horizon. I think what I'm looking for particularly is what are the performance characteristics of these vaccines going to be? There's some evidence that the AstraZeneca vaccine effectiveness may be somewhat less than Moderna and Pfizer. It's still a number that if that were the first one in, we'd be jubilant because it's like 70–80% effective. We'd have thought, well, that's even better than we thought. But now, in comparison to 90–95% with Moderna and Pfizer, it seems like a step down.
Do you run the risk of maybe as other vaccines come out, and we've only got about 3 minutes left, people being more hesitant to take the other vaccines if they're not, if the efficacy rate is not as high as the first two that came out, and that creates its own little problem?
Yeah, I don't know anything about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but the one thing in its favor is that it's one shot. And
give me that one.
So, you know, I think that will probably by itself that'll balance out any concerns about the effectiveness, I would think. Yeah. So I would say whatever vaccines we have access to, take it, and as soon as possible. But you know, a lot of 200 and some million people have got to individually make decisions to go do this. That's a pretty stiff undertaking.
Okay. 30 seconds. Last word?
Well, a few quick words. We're almost there. Everybody stay safe. Have a very Merry Christmas. Enjoy the holidays, but just protect yourselves and your loved ones.
Yeah, same here. This is going to be an unusual Christmas. We're going to still find ways to enjoy it, but remember to always protect the vulnerable by protecting ourselves, and don't take unnecessary risks.
Okay. Gentlemen, have a great holiday season.
You too.
Same to you, Eric.
We appreciate the time, as always. Dr. David Jetmore, Wayne County Health Officer, Dr. Thomas Huth, Vice President, Medical Affairs, Reed Health. We have appreciated your time in 2020 to help us get to this point. Hopefully by the time we get to 2021, we can figure out something else to ask you all about. There's got to be other things, right? Covet testing sites are still open, will be open regular hours, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. The only holiday hours really are Christmas Eve when it's 8 to 1. And Christmas Day, when it's closed, will be open regular hours, though the vaccination clinics are still in the old Elder Bierman site, as well as the Cambridge City site. We'll be talking just after the first of the year about where you can also get your COVID vaccine from the health department. Whitewater Community Television closed during the holiday season. We're just lazy people. So Wednesday, December 23rd at 5 p.m., and we will reopen on Monday, January 4th. We do wish you a very Merry Christmas, a great holiday season. Thank you very much for watching Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. This show will last us through a couple of weeks, but again, we will be back live at 2 p.m. the first Friday of 2021. I wish you well. Have a good holiday. This episode of Ask the Doctors has been brought to you by the City of Richmond and Wayne County Government.
From the Richmond Code Enforcement Department.
On behalf of the Richmond Police Department.
On behalf of the Richmond Street Department.
From everyone at Roseview Transit.
From the Finance Department.
From the Office of Human Resources.
From the Richmond Sanitary District.
From the Parks and Recreation Department.
From the Law Department.
And the Information Technology Department.
From the Department of Infrastructure and Development, City Planning, and the Richmond Municipal Airport.
On behalf of everyone from the Richmond Fire Department.
From all of us here at the City of Richmond to you and your family, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a happy and safe New Year. Stay strong, Richmond.
Your friends in Wayne County government hope you have a happy and safe holiday. They hope you will keep your gatherings to immediate household members. But whatever you choose to do, please follow all local public health guidelines, including proper hand washing, social distancing, and minimally wear your mask.
You realize that quarantining is for your community. You want to stay home to keep everyone who could have severe symptoms of COVID-19 safe.